In this broadcast, the news from Ostankino. An urgent telegram from Meteor Tass reported that Pavel Grachov met with Jahar Dudayev on the territory of Ingushetia. As a correspondent of Meteor Tass reported, one of the representatives on the Russian side in the talks was the Minister of Internal Affairs, Viktor Yerin. After the talks, the minister stated that he and Jahar Dudayev, as military people, understood each other. What that implies is not deciphered in the telegram, but it said that the problem of the imprisoned Russian officers will be resolved in the next few days. Journalists gained the impression that the overall mood of the participants of the meeting was sufficiently benevolent. Evidently, they understood each other quite well. Responding to the question, will there be peace in Chechnya, Jahar Dudayev said that the problem has two aspects, a political one and military one. On the military aspect, with military people, agreement will be found on military problems if politicians don't interfere, he said. The question of independence is a political issue, Jahar Dudayev continued. In this context, he expressed a desire to meet with the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin. Our special correspondent was present today at the talks between the Minister Grachov and the opposition. Today, in the area of Mostok, heads of the forceful structures of Russia met with the leaders of the Chechnya opposition. They discussed the decrees of the president and instructions of government on measures to stabilize the situation around Chechnya. Umar Avturkhanov and Beslan Kantamirov agreed to comply with the demands of Boris Yeltsin on disarming their militarized units on the condition that the same measures be taken on the Jahar Dudayev side. Also, leaders of the opposition unanimously demand the resignation of the president of Chechnya. The deadline for voluntary disarmament set by Boris Yeltsin to the warring sides expires on the 15th of December. Currently, along the perimeter of the border with Chechnya, a large group of forces is stationed, the basic part of which is comprised of the Ministry of Internal Affairs units and a lesser group from the Ministry of Defense and Special Designation units. Pavel Grachov, who heads this group, stated that in the event of a forceful resolution, he does not intend to destroy Grozny and fight with the peaceful population. The Russian leadership hopes that the opposition and Jahar Dudayev have enough political will and common sense to set aside their ambitions and sit at the dialogue tables. The final decision on whether to deploy forces in Chechnya or not will be made in Moscow the 8th of December at the meeting of the Security Council of Russia, after the Minister of Defense will report on the situation to the President and head of government. By evening, it was learned that the sides involved in the Chechnya conflict announced the membership of the delegations for talks. Such talks were proposed by an authorized commission founded on the decision of the government of Russia. Official Grozny is in sending the list and emphasized that it does intend to conduct talks with Russia. Appointed as head of the delegation is Taimas Abubakarov, the Minister of the Economy and Finances of Chechnya. The interim council in opposition to Dudayev has formed its own delegation headed by the prosecutor of the Chechnya Republic, Beg Baskhanov. Meanwhile, in Grozny is a group of deputies of the State Duma headed by Grigory Yavlinsky, the leader of the faction Yabloko, and chairman of the Committee of Defense of the State Duma, Sergei Yushchenkov. As a result of preliminary telephone conversations, agreement was reached that the delegation will be accepted and hosted in Grozny, and possibly all prisoners may be released. Sergei Yushchenkov stated that he takes upon himself the guarantee for the safety of prisoners who will return to Russia from Chechnya. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Chechnya commented on that action in the following manner. We greet this noble gesture of Grigory Yavlinsky, that is, his offer to remain as a hostage instead of the Russian military prisoners, but to keep as a hostage even voluntary hostages, we have no intention here. At the Federative Council meeting today, they spoke as well about the Chechnya problem. The discussions will be behind closed doors tomorrow, but today the preliminary talks were held. But the Russian Information Agency learned the statement of Vladimir Shumeka. He said that the support by certain Russian leaders of the so-called Interim Council of the Chechnya Republic is a criminal mistake. The chairman of the Federative Council feels that Jahar Dudayev came to power as a result of elections, and his power, therefore, is legitimate. And one more bit of news, this time from the State Duma of Russia. Members of the faction LDPR returned from Chechnya and brought with them 2 prisoners. Today, the representatives of the LDPR faction brought back to Moscow 2 more prisoners from Chechnya, Nikolai Sentsov and Vladimir Drozdoy. privates in the tank regiment. The entire crew surrendered to the captors, but the third member of the crew refused to go to Moscow. According to the deputies, the military fear returning to Russia, but instructed their two comrades to tell about the events in Chechnya. However, the soldiers themselves today said almost nothing because of fatigue and psychological tension, and the press conference is planned for tomorrow. It cost us great efforts after agreement was reached with the Chechnya side to convince these fellows to return home. The President of the Russian Federation, the government, the Director of the Federal Service of Counterintelligence should publicly, before all the people, give a guarantee that the safety of these people will be guaranteed. Through Itotas channels, a protest from journalist organizations of Russia was received. I quote, "During the last week, the Russian public has encountered a defiant resistance on the part of the higher organs of government rule to report reliable information about its performance. Furthermore, open falsehood is becoming the style of the government's communication with the people. Journalist organizations have in mind mostly the events in Chechnya and the operation of secret services against Most Bank in Moscow." Today, a press conference of Most Bank was held, but about this later. And now, about the situation in one more region where it was possible to stop bloodshed. The question of a sole command and financing of peacekeeping forces in the zone of the Georgian South Ossetian conflict were discussed during another round of talks between the delegations of Russia, Georgia, Southern and Northern Ossetia. The events, which were not so dramatic lately as much as the meticulous work of the four-sided mixed commission, permitted the public to forget somewhat about the Georgian Ossetian conflict. As a result of talks, the Georgian, North and Southern Ossetian and Russian sides managed to freeze the bloody conflict for 2 years. The Mixed Control Commission embarked on the questions of the next level in normalizing the situation in Southern Ossetia. The status of peacekeeping forces was confirmed within the conflict zone, their sole command by a Russian general, and the paths to restore destructed industry were defined, as well as the return of refugees, especially into the internal areas of Georgia. The heads of the conferring sides stated that such a method of political regularization of the conflict on the CIS territory is a good example to resolve many problems which emerged after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Federative Council today did not ratify the decree of the President of Russia to extend the state of emergency in the zone of the Ossetino-Georgian conflict, and more from the Federative Council. It seems that the day draws closer when Russia again will acquire a constitutional court. Today, as a result of secret balloting in the Federative Council, one more justice was appointed to the Constitutional Court. He's the deputy head of the Military Academy of Economics, Finances and Law, the doctor of juridical sciences, the esteemed lawyer Vladimir Strukozov. He, according to the Tallying Commission, acquired 100 votes. The second contender for the vacant post, the head of the faculty of the Moscow Higher School of Militia, Sergei Vitsin, gained 78 with the necessary minimum of 90 votes. Hence, in the Constitutional Court, there is one more vacant position which remains. The chairman of the Federative Council, Vladimir Shumeka, expressed hope that by year-end all the vacancies will be filled and the Constitutional Court will be able to resume its work after a one-year break. For this, the President of Russia should propose a new candidate to the chamber. And 10 members today were added also to the Supreme Court of Russia. The President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, returned from Budapest to Moscow. It is known that the deputies of the Federative Council expressed a desire to meet with the President and discuss the results of the parliamentary year, so the President will have to deal with domestic problems. But for now, our special correspondent, Sergei Medvedev, reports on the last phase of the summit of the CSCE. Today's final meetings of the European Conference in Budapest seem to me to have somewhat shaken the prestige of this prominent forum. The matter is that a few moments ago its participants could not come to a unanimous decision how to regularize the conflict in former Yugoslavia and especially near Bihać. Specifically, Russia does not strike an accusatory tone against the Serbs, who are considered to be the culprits of the tragic events. In response, quite emotionally, the representative of Bosnia almost branded the European Conference for pandering the aggressors. In order to somehow save the face of the forum, the Hungarians, the hosts of the summit, offered its participants to issue an appeal to ceasefire near Bihać and resolve the delivery of humanitarian aid issue. Against this decision, without even achieving an official status, were the Bosnian representatives, feeling that there is no sense in first feeding the victims, that is, the residents of Bihać, and later deprive them of their very lives, but they remained alone in their stance. This first failed attempt was not unexpected for participants of the meeting, just as the resistance of Armenia to the decision on the cooperation of the CSE with the UN. This could possibly infringe the interests of Armenians near Nagorno-Karabakh. And if one of the member countries of the conference is against adopting a document, then the document is considered to not have passed. Later, such unpleasant moments were not repeated. All the basic documents connected with the transformation of the conference into an Organization on Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, generated no questions. Everyone understood that this was not just a change of a storefront sign, but making the consultative organ into a more efficient organization. I want to note that Russia, under this new European roof, will have no easier task, because here in Budapest, the desire of a majority became quite evident to regulate Russian actions not only in hot points of Europe, but on the entire post-Soviet expanse of the CIS. This is a harsh reality which our diplomats must consider even now. Before the departure of the President to Moscow, our correspondent managed to receive an exclusive interview, which you will see after this program. It's understandable. The basic question, which was discussed at the conference in Budapest, was the future of NATO. The report of Itartas is interesting. From the Center of Military Policy and Systematic Analysis of Russia, the director, Alexander Konovalov, said that as a result of studies conducted, a question arose: do we face a new split in Europe? Scientists and educated people are convinced that the broadening of NATO does not address the interests of the security of Europe, nor the vital foundations of Russia. Russia must seek alternatives in creating a common European system of security, which would not isolate, but involve it in European processes. The Western press is also full of commentary on that topic. As was stated by the official representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Great Britain, at the Budapest summit, a conflict occurred between the President of the United States and the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin. It's possible that this assessment is somewhat exaggerated, but the fact that differences in various approaches do exist between the two leaders to the future of the CSCE and NATO cannot be denied. One of the indicators: for the first time in years, Yeltsin and Clinton did not demonstrate their friendship to those present. On the contrary, their encounter in Budapest was more than restrained. And the essence of their differences boils down to mainly the question of the perspectives of expanding NATO to the east, which, incidentally, for many was not a significant surprise. Because last week, at the NATO Council meeting in Brussels, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andrei Kozyrev, stated that Russia, for now, defers the signing of the corresponding program in the framework of the initiative of the Partnership for Peace. This step evoked irritation in the White House, and the subsequent veto of Russia in the session of the UN Security Council on tightening sanctions against the Serbs only added fuel to the fire. Bill Clinton was extremely irritated while pronouncing the words that no one should place a veto on the idea of broadening NATO, and adding, furthermore, that the path to the North Atlantic Union is open for all. But the President of Russia, responding yesterday to the questions of the press, directed their attention to the fact that the Americans do not want to see Russia in NATO, about which the American president, according to Boris Yeltsin, speaks in a more narrow circle. Practically all leading Western leaders supported the position of the Russian leader. His words about the danger of slipping into a cold peace was met with broad understanding among the Budapest meeting participants. And differences, well, without them we can't have big politics. The main thing is that a small crack in relations should not become a bottomless abyss. And the United States has announced its intention to increase expenditures for defense. Our correspondent with details from Washington. A modest, as they say here, increase in the military budget is intended to increase military readiness of the American Army $25 billion within the next 6 years. The President has promised that he would ask this sum from the Congress. And there he will find understanding. The Senator from Arizona, John McCain, the member of the Committee on Armed Forces, stated that the decision of the President is a small step in the right direction. The Republicans, who now have the majority in Congress, are dissatisfied with Clinton for what they call excessive cuttings in military expenditures. measures. Our army will remain the best trained and best equipped force in the world, said the president in response to his critics. Today, in the regular army of the United States, there's 1,600,000 personnel. Part of the money will go to increase salaries and improve the standard of living for the military in accordance with American standards. The rest of the funds should compensate for unforeseen expenses of the Ministry of Defense. This implies the participation of the American Armed Forces in Somalia, Zaire, Haiti, Kuwait, and the recent operations on apprehending Cuban refugees and aviation in Bosnia. But the Republicans will probably not be pleased with the additional $25 billion. According to all predictions, they will demand more. They intend to save on reducing America's contribution to the UN peacekeeping forces. However, already there are those who warn to act solitarily will cost more. And now again, Russia. Our correspondent, Mikhail Zotov, was instructed to attempt to clarify the situation at the northern borders of the country. Today he returned to our office with quite a sensational bit of news. Today, the northern borders of Russia are under the attentive gaze of smugglers. In Scandinavia, for example, by crossing through Russia, narcotics are trafficked, illegal immigrants are exported from Asian countries, routes are being laid for weapons dealers. However, the number of economic crimes against Russia on its northern borders is much more. Attempts to smuggle contraband nickel to Europe, the illegal fishing in Russian waters, is constantly curtailed by border troops on their antiquating boats with half number of the personnel required. Even during the polar night, they sustain the sea border. On the coast, however, everything's more complicated. Here at the 8th border outpost, a group of border troops, the Arctica, is stationed. Nearby is the Kola Peninsula. 87 kilometers of coastline is guarded by only 18 border troops. But the most interesting thing that there are many who want to serve here on contract, but there is no housing. Also, the contractors would encounter problems during their service as well. The outpost is equipped with radio stations functioning over a distance of only 5 or 6 kilometers. Therefore, the units are often without communications, alone with the weather. The most ideal option would be satellite communications. Military specialists admit that now the borders in the north are guarded only symbolically, since border troops lack not only fuel and communications, but money for power. It's funny, but the fuel service threatened the Murmansk border outpost that it will be disconnected from electricity, even at that remote border outpost. Even in these conditions, border troops stop illegal exporting of Russian raw materials, yet among them, there is a stubborn rumor that after the dismantling of the reconnaissance systems in this region, there are 2 unguarded airports from which one may import or export from Russia everything which can be loaded onto a cargo plane. Russia is being robbed to shreds, and in the government they're thinking about how to make ends meet. Today the vice premiers, Alexis Skovets and Anatoly Chubais, met with the leaders of the Federation of Independent Labor Unions. Salary, unemployment and taxes were the basic topics of the talks. Today, together, 2 first vice premiers, Alexis Skovets and Anatoly Chubais, with their colleagues from government, hosted the leaders of the Federation of Independent Professional Unions. The dry remnants after reviewing October demonstrations, the efforts of Mikhail Shmakov, appeared as follows. To liquidate the debts by the end of the year for salary, the debt in November alone was 4.7 trillion rubles. And also a guarantee of employment for the population. Only from October to November, unemployment jumped by 700,000 people and is now at 4.3 million. And according to reports from the textile regions, for one job, there are 70 unemployed competing. Incidentally, here, unexpectedly, Alexis Skovets made a spontaneous decision, having heard enough complaints, to create a federal organ to manage light industry. And finally, a new taxation policy which threatens to shift part of the collection from firms to individuals. More briefly, all which is already well known to the Cabinet of Ministers, but for now has no positive answers. The unilateral decision of a question was only on the payment of salary for the budgets for workers. It was promised to be paid in the remaining days. Is that realistic? The government again confirmed its intention to increase tax collection from the population, but differentially and incrementally, and the growth of unemployment was unavoidable as a result of perestroika, but again not as high as some of the unions predict. The ministers swore to complete work by the 10th of December and submit to the Duma the draft law on the government guarantees on salary. And the meeting which they held, they decided to name mutual consultations. With that, they parted. But it's known that a final decision was made to allow oil prices to float. However, prices on oil goods will be regulated somehow. If this is not done, all other prices will react in that case. Incidentally, a correspondent of Interfax learned that 80% of Russian business directors intend to continue to increase prices. Simultaneously, hopes for the growth of productivity among directors are even fewer than they were 1 month ago. Inflationary expectations in industry continue to grow. But an interesting detail. Today, for example, Kuzbas is more infrequently called a volatile region. A visit was made there by representatives of parliament and the administration of the president, and here are the impressions. During the various tours through Russia, I have never yet encountered a situation where they ask so little from Moscow and could do so much by themselves. They simultaneously are sustaining a certain level of investments, which is acceptable, and on the other hand are seriously involved in the social sphere. Probably that's why Rosugol is involved in this, in order that the workers would go to work in a positive frame of mind. When in the house it's warm and he has everything, then I understand he reciprocates with respect to the government and to us. Among the paradoxes of our days, everything is appreciating, and the Zhiguli automobile is as difficult to purchase as it was in previous years. The cheapest Zhiguli models in Moscow are $6,050. In Lagavas, they're a little cheaper, $5,600, and yet, given our average salaries, the figures are almost astronomical, and yet the cars are being snatched up. On the domestic automobile market, a small and yet sensational event occurred in the car dealerships of Lagavas, the largest seller of the cars. All sold out were not the used Toyotas, Fords, and Mercedes-Benzes, but the domestic Zhigulis. Suddenly, the moment arrived when demand exceeded supply, and again, the forgotten deficit. The paradox of the market, the unexpected growth in the purchaser's capability, this is, given inflation, or more simply, models of the Volga plant continue to gain popularity. Let economists answer those questions. The salesmen are simply overjoyed. I'm very happy to announce that today Lagavas is beginning a new wide sale of Zhiguli automobiles, all models, in any of its 10 dealerships of Moscow and in the more than 20 cities of Russia. Together with the new wave of trade, a new project of Lagavas takes force. On an average, around 100 Zhigulis are sold per day. These are new models. Now, for the first time in the sector in Russia, Lagavas offers its customers the opportunity to exchange their old cars for a relatively new one, or a new one of another brand, or, on the contrary, to buy a used car, but which has been serviced and repaired. The option depends on your finances. With everything, a guarantee, given a 1-year service contract, and home delivery. There's one goal, so that the automobile style of life would be accessible to a larger circle of pedestrians, even if in our country they are not yet rich enough. You have to note, many plants have shut down. Many plants are having difficulties these days, but Avtovaz truly produces cars, and these cars are in great demand, not only in the country but abroad, and I feel the rebirth of the Russian economy will absolutely begin with the rebirth of the automobile industry. And now, information which we received regarding the infamous operation of the special designation units, which they conducted near the municipal building in Moscow the 2nd of December. Today, this was the topic of a meeting in the Kremlin of the head of the administration of the President, Sergei Filatov, and the aide of Boris Yeltsin, with directors of the largest commercial banks of Russia. They discussed the possible repercussions. Apart from that, today a press conference was held where our correspondent was also present. The president of Most Bank, Vladimir Gusinsky, told the journalists today that against his employees an intimidative action was perpetrated, the reason for which he can only speculate on. Vladimir Gusinsky noted that he builds no illusions regarding the results of the criminal case launched by the prosecutor's office. Incidentally, as participants of the press conference were told at today's meeting with the head of the administration of the President, Sergei Filatov, the bankers heard an adequate assessment, in their opinion, of the actions of the special forces. The financiers are certain that Boris Yeltsin has absolutely no involvement in the operation and intends, at the planned meeting with the President, to demand the punishment of its organizers. The situation at home always defines our mood and our plans. Therefore, it's understandable why the Speaker of the Russian Parliament, Ivan Rybkin, was forced to condense his program of his visit to the British Isles to 2 days. And in the new itinerary, it was possible to fit in much. The meeting on the historic staircase of the two speakers, Betty Boutroyd and Ivan Rybkin, symbolized the mutual friendship of one of the oldest parliament and one of the youngest. Betty Boutroyd, with enviable mastery, conducts the mail female majority choir in the House of Commons promised in her post to do everything so that reforms in Russia would not stop and that democracy would acquire features well discernible in the West. The meeting of Ivan Rybkin with leading politicians revealed that currently, despite the difficult international backdrop, our positions are aligning more and more. The English specifically share the idea of the careful, gradual broadening of NATO to the east of Europe, as was emphasized by the chairman of the Conservative Party, Jeremy Henley. The rashness in this matter is uncalled for. Full understanding was greeted toward Russia's striving of trying to bring order into its own house. Here we worked extensively. There are very interesting proposals on joint work to provide aid and support in our reforms. The Vice Premier of Iraq again will come to Moscow to meet with the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. The aim is to exchange views on final resolution of the Iraqi-Kuwaiti crisis. One must note the serious influence of Russia on the Yugoslavian and on the Iraqi problem. Russia actively defends its interests on the international arena. Croatia is delving deeper into the abyss of the Bosnian conflict. Units of the regular army of Croatia continue to attack Bosnian Serb positions in south and central Bosnia. The Croat advances with massive support of artillery and shellfire shooting at civilian objects. The leader of the Bosnian Serbs, Radovan Karadzic, threatened that his forces would begin to bomb Zagreb if in the next few days Croatia does not pull its units out of Bosnia. Through Iturtas channels, we received a report that another time Kabul has been fired at. 7 people have been killed, 12 injured. Iturtas quotes Kabul radio, speaking of the fact that jet-launched shells were fired by the supporters of the Islamic Party of Afghanistan. And despite the shooting, the first UN convoy with humanitarian aid in the last 6 months did arrive in Kabul. They say the ringing of bells somehow clears the air. This hypothesis has a scientific basis, but there are opponents to that theory. No one, however, disputes the fact that the ringing of bells somehow elevates the soul. The ringing of bells, lauded by classics, venerated by Russians, and pervasively obliterated, again returns to Russia. To cut down bells turned out to be far easier than stringing them up to their appropriate place again. The suburban Moscow Sofrina, the bell which was forged on the donations of the parishioners today on the day commemorating the Holy Venerable Prince Alexander Nevsky, was raised into its belfry and blessed. It would seem not a greatly significant event. The province, a small parish, and restoration is still not completed, and yet the church is already functioning with its own voice, a voice which marks feasts and holidays, and, if necessary, would sound the alarm, although, God forbid, let this bell, on which the name of the national Russian hero, Alexander Nevsky, is cast, never should be the herald of any trouble. And I wish you the same. Anatoly Malevin with the sports news is already in the studio, so I say goodbye. We don't plan to give away points to Spartak and will strive only for victory. This is the Spartak team being warned by the trainer of the French club Paris Saint-Germain, Louis Fernandez. Good evening. And tomorrow in Paris, Spartak will attempt to move through the finals of the League of Champions, and only victory will give the Russian champion this chance. The same objective will be pursued in the Kievan match between the Ukrainian Dynamos and the Munich Bavaria team. And just now we received sensational news. The Madrid Real, which lost to the Andense team from Denmark, is out of the running for the coveted trophy. And we, in waiting for tomorrow's big soccer evening on television company Ostankino, will look at today's news. At the Olympic base in the suburban Moscow Novogorsk, where usually the Russian teams prepare for Olympics and world tournaments, this time a great conference of the chairman of the sports committees of almost all regions of Russia. Among the top priorities, I feel that, after all, sports and the sports movement in our country, you know the results of competitions, and that's good, but today our main objective is to devote attention to the healing of the nations. Will the Russian chess players match their rivals? The main intrigue of the World Chess Olympics, and the main sensation today is the defeat of Garry Kasparov by the Vasilin Topalov, the Bulgarian player, and Bulgaria has beat our team 2.5 by 1.5 points. Meanwhile, the players of Holland ended a tie with Lithuania 2-2 and are still ahead. Among the women, the Georgian team leads. And now, the International Hockey League. The results of another round in the chart. I'll note the success of Lada, Avangard, and the victory of Magnitogorsk Metallurg over Novokuznetsk Metallurg 6-4. The Magnitogorsk team is previously ahead with 43 points. In the Western Zone, we single out Spartak's victory 4-3 and 2 ties here. In the lead are the Dynamos with 37 points. One of the leading professional cyclers of our days, Greg LeMond, an American racer, has gathered during his career a unique collection of prizes and awards. In his list, there are 3 victories of the most prestigious cycle race, the Tour de France, and now Greg LeMond is leaving professional sports. Greg announced this at a press conference to the press. Good evening. Information from the Oceanic Meteorological Center of Russia. Over the north of the European continent, the activities of the Atlantic cyclones continues, and connected atmospheric fronts, which will leave once they reach Russia, will die down in their activity. Tomorrow, another atmospheric front will shift from Poland to the west of the central region. It will bring some light rains and wet snows to the Baltic countries, Belarus, and into the northwest region. Day temperatures from 0 to +4. In the middle of the day, after the front passes through, the weather will improve, but later the zone of unpleasant weather will spread to the central and central Chernozem area, where also will be cloudy with isolated snow, wet snow with icy road conditions. During the day, temperatures will be 0 to -5. The Kola Peninsula, Karelia, and the Arhangelsk area, they expect no precipitation. It will be partly cloudy with day temperatures of -2 to 6. Here, that is the influence of a zone of higher atmospheric pressure. In the Nenetsk Autonomous District, in the Polar Ural, and in the Republic of Komi, the Volgovetsk area, some light snow, and it's a little colder, -7 to 10, in the Polar Ural, as low as -14. Over the lower and central Volga, in the Rostov area, in the Krasnodar and Stavropol Rim areas, and in the northern Caucasus, cloudy but no precipitation, however cool, 0 to -5, in Sochi, +6 to 8 degrees. Ukraine and Moldova will be under the influence of an atmospheric front, which will shift into this area from the northwest. Meteorologists expect partly cloudy skies with isolated light precipitation, with morning fogs during the day, +2 to 7. Beyond the Caucasus, also partly cloudy skies in Georgia and Azerbaijan, around 0. In Armenia, -2 to 4 degrees. In St. Petersburg, cloudy without much significant precipitation during the day, around 0. The influence of an atmospheric front from the west will influence the weather of Moscow. There will be isolated snow and wet snow with patches of morning fog. At night, -3 to 5. During the day, 0 to -2, with icy road conditions. That completes our broadcast. Goodbye.